I'd like to offer a psychological analysis of what the idea was behind Dave Portnoy using a teachable moment approach for the F the Jews saga that took place. But first, let me set the theoretical background. So in 2007, I wrote my first book. My first book came out, The Evolutionary Basis of Consumption. And in one of the later chapters where I'm talking about all sorts of deleterious behaviors that people engage in, excessive sun tanning and pathological gambling and internet, pornographic addictions and compulsive buying and excessive sun tanning. One of the typical argument for why people engage in behaviors that are detrimental to them is that they don't have better information. If only they had better information, then they wouldn't do what they're doing. So if you are fat, overweight, and have high blood pressure, and you spend all day on your couch, stuffing your face with French fries, it must be because you don't know any better. Now, if only the benevolent, empathetic government were to create public service announcements teaching you that it's bad to, be a beached whale and never exercise and never have, never eat healthy foods. If you learn otherwise, then you'll stop engaging in this behavior. And of course, this is known as the economics of information approach, and it's completely false. And so the example that I like to often give is that when you are trying to, say, reach men and get them to stop smoking, you could give them the epidemiological actuarial tables of the likelihood of them getting cancer or heart disease in 40 years from now. That is accurate information, but the average young guy who's 20 and full of vigor and thinks that they are immortal doesn't give a damn about what's going to happen in 40 years. He thinks he's immortal. It won't happen to him. But if you explain to him instead that the best predictor of a young man having a physiological based erectile dysfunction, not psychological based, but physical based, it's if you are a heavy smoker. And so if you tell that young man that it's likely to trigger people into doing actions A or B is a really important skill to have. That's why I tell my students that understanding evolutionary psychology is ultimately something that will help you throughout your life, whether you're an employer or an employee or a manager or a husband or a wife or a sibling or an investor. Anything that you're going to do in life is only going to be served by having an accurate understanding of human nature. And that accurate understanding of human nature can only come via a proper understanding of our evolutionary-based human nature. Other example, if you're trying to tell women to stop suntanning, I published a paper in 2006 with a dermatologist whereby we were looking at behavioral patterns in excessive suntanning via an evolutionary lens. Not surprisingly, the literature has found that young single women are the ones most likely to engage in this behavior, whether it be exposure to natural sunlight or purchasing a service in an artificial sunbed. It is overwhelmingly women who engage in this behavior, despite the fact that research shows that women are more knowledgeable about the deleterious of such behaviors than men are. So this falsified the premise that the reason why people do bad things is because they don't know otherwise, and simply teach them and they'll stop doing it. So now you can see why I just gave this background framework to the Dave Portnoy story. Dave Portnoy found out that at a bar that he owns, a couple of waitresses had put up a sign, "Fuck the Jews," and one of the guys, I think there were two guys involved in the thing. One of them is surprisingly named Muhammad. Of course, surprisingly, because Islam only loves the Jews, right? There's absolutely no proof whatsoever that Islam hates the Jews. That's why there are hugely thriving Jewish communities in Kuwait, Bahrain, Oman, Saudi Arabia, Algeria, Tunisia, Morocco, Libya, Lebanon, Syria, Egypt, Pakistan, Afghanistan, just gorgeous, fertile, rich, exciting Jewish communities in those countries. And to the extent that Jews have disappeared in all those countries where the Jews were there thousands of years before Islam ever existed, it must be because the Jews are Islamophobic. Because when Muhammad said on his deathbed, "Promise me that you will rid Arabia of the Jews," he meant it in the most peaceful of ways. And when in the past 1400 years, hundreds of millions of people have been killed and subjugated under the love and peace of Islam, that must just be a misunderstanding. So Muhammad here, who was a Temple University student, was involved in this. And so at first, Dave Portnoy had the reflex, the justified moral indignation to say, "I'm going to go after you. I'm going to get you, whoever did this." And then he swallowed a pill of suicidal empathy, and he channeled his Barack Obama, who was, as a quote professor, he, who is always teaching us, the noble prophet Muhammad is not Muhammad, Barack Obama is always teaching us. And so he's the one who really popularized the term teachable moment, if you remember, when he was president. And so Dave Portnoy decided to turn this into a teachable moment. And he thought, I'm going to send these two guys, one of whom is named Muhammad. I'm going to send them to Auschwitz so that they could learn about what the Jews have gone through. Yes? Of course, the argument there being is that to the extent that these two individuals hate the Jews, it must be because they don't know any better. And if only we can explain to them what's happened to the Jews, then we can maybe humanize the Jews. And as I mentioned in the first round of doing this X Spaces, which I hadn't regrettably recorded, not to be pedantic, but Dave Portnoy said that it was in Germany, and Auschwitz is not in Germany. So it might be good to make sure that our geographic accuracy is veridical. But notwithstanding that small error, he thought, hey, let me send them to see what happened to the Jews, and then they can come back all full of love and respect for the Jews. Well, in many, many countries, not just Islamic countries, you don't teach the Holocaust. And in European countries, now many of the classrooms that have a great preponderance of Muhammads, they are forcing the teachers in France and Britain to no longer teach the Holocaust because the Holocaust is offensive to Muslims. Did you hear that? It's offensive to teach the Holocaust. And by the way, the Holocaust is just a holocaust. It didn't happen. And if it did happen, it was only 60 Jews that were killed, not 6 million. The Jews make up that stuff so they can play victims. So the idea that if only you could send these two guys and teach them about Jewish history and what the Jews have gone through, suddenly they would find love towards the Jews, is exactly the perfectly incorrect understanding of what drives this. It's not lack of information that caused these two folks to hate the Jews. In the case of Muhammad, it is the central feature of what defines his identity. Okay? So if anything, you could show him a million footage of the Holocaust. It's going to only embolden him. There's a clip that I've often shared where you see an imam who is watching all of the bodies of the Jews that are skeletal being pushed by a bulldozer into a common anonymous grave. And he is lamenting, oh, Ya Allah, why did you not give us the pleasure to kill the Jews? Why do you hate us so, Allah, that you gave that pleasure to eradicate the Jews to Hitler and not to us? Why do you hate us, Allah, that you didn't cause us the pleasure to kill off the Jews? Does that strike you as though that imam needed to be sent to Auschwitz? So while I appreciate that Dave Portnoy was trying to appear magnanimous and taking the high road by offering these two degenerates a teachable moment, as you found out now that Muhammad has flipped. I think it was the Muhammad who flipped 180 degrees now and is no longer, is recanting his admission and so on, whatever it is. Basically, it has forced Dave Portnoy to withdraw his offer to send these two guys on his own expense to Auschwitz. So again, the lesson here is that a proper understanding of what drives people to engage in behaviors is incredibly crucial when you are subsequently trying to implement an intervention strategy. And the idea that people do bad things, think wrong things, act in wrong ways simply because they don't know any better is one of the most fundamentally erroneous views as relating to these issues. It's exactly the opposite. People fully know the reality, and yet they persist in that behavior. There you have it, folks. I hope that this time around it has recorded the session. I will also be posting this on my podcast and on my YouTube channel. Thank you to everybody who came for round 2. I'll talk to you soon. Cheers, everybody.